So I watched this Chinese movie called Better Days. Yeah, and I mean this despite seeming like some sort of um, public announcement thing, like something that government would normally put out. I mean, it mentions what initiatives ministries implemented, etc. But I mean, one cannot call it propaganda unless it's propaganda against bullying, which makes no sense because Um, so, but now it was quite brutal as it deals with bullying, but it was actually really well made as well as a movie. I mean, the editing was quite interesting. The way it was constructed and everything. Yeah, uh, I quite liked it. It's one of those things, it begins, I mean, in the past, movies I've seen about bullying were from the horror genre mainly. So I kind of approached it from this horror perspective because of that. But obviously, it wasn't. I mean, in a similar fashion. I mean, in horror, it would, well, let's say, I mean, Carrie was sort of like that. That's Western. So I have seen also Eastern horror that featured bullying. Bullying is sort of a horror trope, I guess one could say, possibly. But no, this is more from a. I mean, in horror, usually it turns supernatural, right? Like at the end of Carrie, etc. Um, but obviously not this. This is entirely grounded to reality. That is. Um, but it's otherwise, yeah, quite interesting the way it was presented, the music and everything. So let's just say, I mean, it was quite brutal, right? So I'll say that it was not unlike as it happens. I mean, well, not quite as brutal. There is a single murder, whereas the movie I just watched yesterday, there were a gazillion. So yeah, and coincidentally, so this movie is made by apparently uh, a Pictures Limited called Goodfellas, as it happens, and also though Fat Kids Production. Not sure what they got to do in combat. Anyway, um, yeah. Well, no, in comparison to that, I mean, if one must compare, I mean, well, yeah, yeah. So what they have in common is the brutality. Sure enough, I mean, besides the fact, I mean, most of the brutality here isn't lethal, unlike in yesterday's movie. But there was something else, right? I mean, this is a point that I was mentioning yesterday. There was something else other than simple brutality. I have no idea how people can simply, see just constant brutality, and oh yeah, sure, just because just because some pop songs were included, oh suddenly it's the most brilliant thing ever. Yeah, no, I don't know how what this this is something else, right? I mean, sure enough, the music was pretty good as well. Not pop songs. It was more piano and such. The OST thought was quite amazing. But not just that either. I mean, you need a proper story, right? And this is a proper story. This is, you got such complexity as opposed to, oh, great, a story about brute force. Wow, no. This is quite interesting. I mean, bullying by itself is a brute force. A form of brute force. And sure enough, I got to admit the bully isn't quite multidimensional, shall we say? They're quite sort of psychopathic in this sense, but otherwise, what happens, the rest and such. I mean, how those other two met. And how they developed this relationship, and then how they try to protect each other and such against this world, or even the system itself seems to somehow um, continue this sort of bullying mindset. I guess you can understand that they need to get down to investigate what happens sometimes and such, but obviously there is something missing as well in terms of the system and how it works. But otherwise, I mean, I just saw it as way more complex than yesterday's movie was. I'm just saying, just obviously if I didn't watch it yesterday, I wouldn't be comparing it so directly. But as it happens, since this it's made by Pictures Limited, called the same exact title. Anyway, I'm just saying that. I mean, they both have brutality. I mean, many movies have brutality, actually. Maybe not to the extent that, yesterday's had, but many do. But if you just have brutality, I don't see the point of it. Even horror. A lot of horror has brutality. It's not quite what I like most about it. I mean, especially if just plain gore is involved. That's not what's best about horror. But same thing. So if there is just brutality, just gore, just I just do not like it really. I mean, there needs to be a really good story as well. I've seen some that had good stories that were brutal, and I think this does fall under that category. Really, it's quite brutal. The bullying is quite brutal, but it has a good story. It has a complex story. It has a heartfelt story. I think that's the key word here. It is quite heartfelt. You see from the editing, from the music. The music is quite central to this film. I think it's actually been it's lucky that there is a good translation, shall we say? Because bad translations always ruin it. I mean, I don't know. I've just never felt really really moved by something that has a bad translation, unfortunately, because bad translation sort of takes you out of it. This didn't though. This had a quite good translation. Um, so yeah, it is sort of similar to uh, not similar in any sort of in a different sort of sense though, from a political romance that I once also commented on. I think obviously that one though is very much optimistic, so they just keep going up and up in terms of good things happening. But it's still sort of a multi-genre movie thing, so this is like I guess you could say, I don't know, some sort of um, it's a bit weird as well. I've never seen this exact thing. So there's parts where it's sort of like a police detective thing. Others that are romance. Others where bullying is involved. I'm not sure what bullying falls under. I guess I could say horror, but anyway, yeah, it's quite. Whereas of course a political romance was more about obviously politics essentially, even though it was supposed to be a political. But well, yeah, it was much more of a comedy, really. It did have still romantic elements. Similarly, though, the romance wasn't full blown, so they were both quite kind of muted, in terms of romance. So they both grew bit by bit. The point is, I think that's the best kind of romance really. If you must make romance really, I just what's the point of just having just full blown romantic relationship really? But yeah, this was quite something, the way it was constructed, as I say. It had a heart, and it was also though made like a jigsaw puzzle in a way. So you don't get all the versions, or I mean the reality of it all at once or anything. You at first think this happened, but not really. This happened and that happened. They just show you at the end. So I think that's also a really good way to build up any sort of, I suppose, detective sort of story. But yeah, I didn't expect this also, to be honest. I didn't expect. I mean, um, originally I came to this movie from the friendship genre, so it's quite. It's not exactly that, is it? It's much more than simple. I mean, it's more about enemies than friendship, actually. Many people seem to be bullied and such. But yeah, and in terms of how it deviated though from horror, I suppose, uh, was quite what made it. I mean, I preferred to most horror movies about bullying, because with horror one doesn't get a bit of a break sometimes. Just keeps on going on, and even at the end, um, like cello, for example, it's uh, quite incessant. It just keeps going on and on. Loads of killings and such. It did have a good story, cello. I'm not saying it didn't, but it's quite relentless. This wasn't though. This was. I mean, sure, it had one of that, but not any others, and it did have a lot of violence, but it seemed to have this protective shell sort of around it, that I suppose their relationships formed, that somehow this belief in a future somehow materialized. To be honest, I thought though the fact that she did well in an exam, was quite a bit hard to believe, because one normally does not very well, and they did show that she seemed to be distracted during the exams. I'm not entirely sure how she did so well, but I mean it's a minor thing, I suppose, overall, in 2 hours and 15 minutes. But realistically, one would get distracted, gotta say. But otherwise, it was quite something, and the way they played with light as well was quite interesting. Like in his house, it was quite dark, so the mood was so dark as well, and so was it during the night, obviously, outside when the bullying was most likely to occur. But during the day, it wasn't necessarily positive either, as evidenced by the fact that they didn't use any cheery music during the day, during these periods of light. They did mention, they did say at one point that you always see the light, like sort of at the end of the tunnel, which that's not exactly what they said, but that's the gist. And I thought, well, what if though there is no light? There's no guarantee that there would be light, and that wasn't necessarily for her either, or him, or the bully. Um, Bullying doesn't really result in anything positive, really, because the bully themselves doesn't know at that exact moment. But you know, uh, in this case, I mean, somehow, I'm not sure if it's based on a real story. It seemed to indicate that it is at the end there. I just need to read about it. It seems to do because they said that she had a custody sentence as well. But if it is, so this is the thing, right? So if it is, it's sort of similar, I suppose, to yesterday's movie, right? Which was also sort of a biographical crime thing. So this here it doesn't say that it's crime technically, but it's, I mean, stuff occurs obviously that could be labeled that, and the fact that the police are involved. So in a way, it is similar, but one could see, I mean, the contrast in how both are constructed. I honestly don't get how people could rate something so relentlessly brutal with no sort of redemption whatsoever, and just I, yeah. Um, Also, I don't get Scorsese really. I read what he said at one point with regards to people getting angry at the system, that the system lets people, presumably from what I can understand, I'm not sure if it is this that he was referring to from what I've read, but it seemed to say that since the system let this specific criminal to get away with it just so he could act as a witness for others, and people should get angry at that because despite him being almost nearly as much as at fault as others, he got away with it and such. But then he paid him. I mean, how could you say that and pay him? And he actually acted as an advisor and such, and obviously, well, yeah. I don't get Scorsese. I don't get what he's. I mean, if he wasn't trying to glorify what the theme of what he does, then I don't know what else. Um, this on the other hand, I mean, I cannot say that that this movie tries to glorify bullying. It's clearly here, clearly much more sensible in the way it approaches the topic. I think it's it's moderate, I suppose one could say, and mm, you know, one could easily see that bullying doesn't lead for anything positive to anyone at all, really. Yeah. But yeah, in comparison, though, um, yeah, as I said, though, it does have something more. Now, it does still seem to have accolades and such. Critics seem to like it, along with the audience. Possibly, it's still not popular. I mean, it only came out last year, so I guess it still has time. But I don't know if it's maybe it's because, but at least I mean people could sort of still see. I mean, I do come across movies that I seem to think are brilliant, whereas most others seem to think they're not somehow. This doesn't seem to be one of them, I guess. It's still not very popular, but it's but I still cannot quite tell. I mean, what people would find, what makes them think that something is the best thing ever, something. I mean, because there are similarities, obviously. This is also a crime film. I mean, it has much more romance, obviously, and the other one didn't really have much. You cannot really call whatever that was romance, really. That was just bizarre romance a bit. It wasn't romance. It was just a marriage of convenience, wasn't it? In yesterday's, but this was, yeah, this had heart, I suppose, and I mean, I suppose I'm not arguing necessarily against what people can already see, possibly. But I don't know the fact that it's not too popular. I suppose. I mean, it's been what, like, half a year now, a bit more than half a year since it came out, and I don't know. Goodfellas has over 1,000 reviews, ridiculously, right? I think, and this one has so yeah, and Better Days has 35 reviews. I mean, I mean, it is likely to do with the fact that one is Western, one is Eastern, but I just don't understand how people can, you know, even if a movie needs to have brutality, right? And both of them did. Unlike, say, a political romance, which had no brutality at all, really, from what I remember. It just had a awkward romance mainly, but yeah, and then comedy based on that. This wasn't much of a comedy, so I suppose in that sense it's not. But I mean, I don't get how people can see a movie that just has brutality and violence and say, yeah, that's one of the best movies ever. Because I mean, this is not the first time that I come across something like Better Days, where it does have brutality, but it also has a heart to it and a proper story. I mean, what's wrong with a proper story? I mean, sure, it's yesterday's was a biography, so I guess it is whatever biographies are about. Don't normally change them too much. I mean, they could change them if they wanted to, but it's they usually don't. Um, and yeah, this Better Days movie might also be actually seems like it might be fictional. I think it's seems to indicate. Yeah, I'm not sure why they have that thing at the end. I suppose with fiction you can construct it however you like. It might be slightly more cinematic. Saying that, people seem to like. Um, I mean, you know, the average here is 7.5, which isn't bad. I'm not saying it's bad. Doesn't have many viewers though. Only 2057 so far rated it. Yeah. So it's uh, it's fine though. Oh, and by the way, while Goodfella had 100 and what was it again? Ridiculous amount, like nearly 200 trivia entries. Better Days has 5. Hmm. Me sure. One could simply think that it's to do with when they came out. The same with popularity and such, but I don't suppose so, is it? Because I mean, um, well, I think others like even Parasite itself, which I suppose is similarly a foreign language film for many people. Obviously, it won an Oscar, so it will be naturally more renowned. But it's rated higher. I mean, to be fair, I didn't watch it, so I cannot tell exactly whether it's merited or not. But yeah, actually, wow, it has 250 reviews. That's incredible. So I'm just saying that just because it was released last year doesn't mean it won't necessarily be seen by many people. I suppose one could say. Yeah, it was seen by nearly half a million people, at least rated by nearly half a million. Yeah, whereas obviously Better Days is only rated by 2000, and Goodfellas, which came out quite a long time ago now, 30 years ago. Yeah, I guess that is the difference, I suppose. I mean, it can still make a difference. It's been rated by nearly a million. although somehow not reviewed more than Parasite, which has been rated less, so I guess people had more to say about Parasite, I'm assuming. Um, 1,295 reviews is still a lot, but not even remotely as much as Parasite has, which is double that, more than double. I'm not saying that, I clearly do not watch movies that are only, popular. I watch absolutely everything. I try to mix around and stuff, but I honestly have no idea why some are more popular than others. Some are rated more highly than others. Obviously, as I said, I cannot compare it to Parasite because I haven't seen it. But in terms of the brutality that I can compare it with the last film I just watched, you know, it doesn't compare that, in my opinion. I mean, the movie wasn't there to showcase the brutality itself. No, the romance was more center stage in this case. It was quite a muted romance. I mean, there was only this small section where they were going around on a scooter and whatnot and smiling just a bit, but then straight away the story came knocking them down once again because of some sort of setup or something. They didn't quite clarify where there really was. So when they had ended up lining up and such, and which made her lose her protection against the bully. I thought that the bully might have organized that to get him away from her. Was never clarified. Well, minor thing, I mean, but yeah, that was quite harsh. I thought, for that to happen quite after all the little bit of happiness. I mean, it wasn't quite a lot of happiness, just a little bit, just some shared interests and such. Yeah, I mean, it's better than nothing. So it's better than just incessant brutality. I mean, in yesterday's movie, practically everyone was a bully. So I don't know. Am I supposed to root for this bully or that other bully? I don't know. Obviously, I'm not saying that in every movie they're made for the audience to root for someone, right? I I also don't quite understand though why with Goodfellas it seemed to have a bad audience reaction. I read, but as soon as it came out, somehow it was critically acclaimed. Like I don't know how often that happens. Where suddenly, after a bad audience reaction, somehow, well, the audience in general, not just a selected audience, I guess, seemed to like it as much as critics did. It doesn't happen very often. I don't know how often, really. I don't have statistics or anything. But yeah, somehow both critics and the audience seem to like it. Uh, well, clearly the audience, except a few people, yeah, just it's a bit frustrating when I can't even understand why. So, like as I said, though, I can understand sort of, you know, I didn't like this thing quite a lot. I didn't like it as much as I liked Better Days, but I can sort of understand why people like it. It's clever the way it's done and such to to construct this as thing, I mean, as opposed to the romantic elements this movie had on the other hand. So obviously every movie has an element, a theme that is central. But when brutality is the be all and end all, when it's the whole thing about a movie, it makes little sense in my opinion. Because you need something to coat around such brutality. You cannot just have brutality on itself. What's the point of that, right? This the same goes for many horror movies, in my opinion, and this is why ended up rating many horror movies lonely, really, because many of them do seem to think as long as we have brutality, it's a horror movie. Not really. If it's gory, I just feel disgust mainly, which is not something I necessarily want to feel. And it's not crucially, it's not something that makes me feel horrified. It's just disgust. Disgust isn't horrified, you know. If somebody is vomiting, I don't feel horror. I do not fear it. I just feel disgust. It's a different thing. You know, I don't know why they seem to think that disgust is horror. Uh, that's a problem horror movies have specifically. But many other movies, I suppose this might be a problem that crime movies have, seem to think that as long as they have endless brutality, people will like it. And it seems like they're not incorrect, I suppose. Just that I don't personally think it is what really makes a. I mean, yeah, I do actually sort of appreciate, especially after knowing, like after finishing Goodfellas, you know, I could actually tell that the mother, when they went to their home, that's obviously the only, you could say it's the only redeemable scene. I mean, the context surrounding it is anything but redeemable, but within the scene itself and how it was acted and how, you know, how Scorsese told her to sort of, uh, just, be hospitable for these people. He didn't actually tell her the context because, yeah, I'm sure she would be horrified if she knew. And I could tell though that she was his mother. Their eyebrows look so alike. What I did miss though was his father, which also acted there as well. I suppose it's sort of, I mean, sure, under normal circumstances, one could say it's sort of nepotism, I guess. But these are, I guess, they were two people in their prime now, beyond their prime. So, really, I don't think I worry too much. Um, she was played a mother apparently in many movies. Uh, but this is the thing. I mean, some people said that they simply liked how they in inverted commas, they joked in that pub. You know, I don't know what's to like about it. To be honest, this is some sort of weird, intimidating thing. I mean, it was, uh, and frankly, I do not know why he won an Oscar's Best Supporting Actor either. I mean, sure, he fulfilled his role as a, just whatever he needed to fulfill, as opposed to, in my opinion, Paul, that guy that played Paul, he seemed to think that he didn't have it in him, and it sort of showed, he really didn't seem like the others, it didn't seem intimidating and such. But this is the thing, I mean, I do not go to watch a movie just to feel intimidated, and if that's the only feeling I come out with, I do not say, well, that was a great movie. Great, I feel intimidated. Wow. I mean, I suppose it might be sort of similar, I suppose, to feeling horrified in horror, but not quite. I mean, even with horror, to be honest, I do not go that just feel horrified. I also want to feel like the horror had something along with it, something that coped with it, something sort of like, like. I mean, I know it was much more comedic than it was horror, but Spellbound, it did have a bit of horror, but mostly comedy. But that's the thing, you get maybe I just simply like multiple genres, I guess, ultimately. But it's this coating that I think makes a movie, whether it's the same genre or not. You need sort of multiple layers to build it up. And if you only have one layer, it's just one-dimensional, in my opinion. This is the problem with a lot of, you know, as opposed to, I suppose, this thing which did have multiple layers. It's unfortunate that one of its major layers was gambling jargon, which, in my opinion, wasn't incredibly interesting. But it wasn't, I mean, a bad film otherwise, because it did still have multiple layers. Sort of like the conversation as well. It wasn't just about paranoia, it was also about, the conflict between work and one's personal life and such. Movies really need multiple layers, in my opinion. And sure enough, people might still like movies with single dimension. But this is the thing. I think it's really, even Better Days. It didn't just have this. I suppose you might say it also had a bit of a thriller in it. It had an element of romance, although it wasn't still too overbearing or anything. It wasn't too gaudy or anything. It was in fact muted at best. But all of this coated the brutality of bullying. And on top of that, it also had this examination system, which I've personally never seen in a movie before, and apparently it's quite brutal in itself. I didn't realize it was 9 hours long. That's quite a long time. So it had all these layers, and it built up this movie that worked well, in my opinion. I mean, if it was just sort of, if it was just the police detective thing, it would be so similar to, suppose, that Shinri series, that also had psychology in it. So I suppose that's another layer that it had. But otherwise, it did focus a lot on this single layer of police detective sort of stories, And in my opinion, movies need to have multiple layers. Movies or series, whichever. Obviously, with a series, I suppose it might end up being a single layer, just because it's every episode covers the same and just adjacent sort of topics, I suppose. But then movies can do that as well, so it's not just series, really. But yeah, this is what I liked about it. I think it was quite a good movie because of that. It just had multiple layers, and I don't normally like just plain romances on their own, especially if they're pretentious or showy. Or I mean, this was quite a oppressive sort of romance, not in itself, but obviously everything surrounding it and how it was built in the first place. It was rooted in people's oppression, but then these two met and somehow they tried to do something about it. And by the way, I just read that apparently they used a song from someone who incidentally happened to have committed suicide as well. So there's the multiple layers of reality and fiction intertwining in this sense. I don't think she committed suicide due to the same reason as this, though. I don't think I don't. But the article was very short anyway, so I'm not sure anyway. But yeah, just it's. And someone here says that it was actually censored by the government, so might not be as much of a public announcement as they thought. I guess if it was, if I'm assuming it didn't have much of a hand in it. Then if it censored it, I don't know though. I don't get though how, if it was fiction, how it seemed, at the end it said that it made any difference in terms of law and such against bullying. if it was fiction. I mean, how is that possible unless fiction has such a pull, I guess. But yeah, otherwise, as a movie, it was quite well done, in my opinion. Yeah.